Hello. Hello. Hello, this is Daniel Leroux. I'm here today with some preserved invertebrate specimens under the microscope. Right now, we are looking at a species of butterfly called the nawab. This is the wing. As you can see, butterfly wings are very unique in structure because they are covered with these types of scales that actually produce what we see on the butterfly's wings. They're actually colorless, but depending on how the scales reflect the light, that is what we interpret as the color. Butterflies are a unique species in the animal kingdom. They're mostly pollinators and they eat nectar of flowers. Let's see if we can get a shot of the mouth parts. There we go. Now, most of the specimens we'll see today are preserved in acrylic. This is one of the specimens that is not preserved in acrylic. This one is just preserved in a shadow box. You can see that the butterfly is actually covered with small hairs. This is a unique feature of butterflies. Their bodies typically have these hairs. Moths will have those too. And the one of the main differences between butterflies and moths are the antenna. Butterflies typically have straight antenna with not many features on them. This is a butterfly. If this was a moth, you would be able to see a more feather-like structure to the antennas. This is usually used to pick up pheromones or other chemical messengers left behind by moths. And as you can see, the butterfly has a unique eye structure. Most invertebrates have what are known as compound eyes, which are made up of hundreds of thousands of different lenses. Some invertebrates have evolved this even further, and each lens will have its own optic nerve leading right to the brain, which can be interpreted as 360-degree vision at one point in time. So they can actually see all around them and everywhere around their head all at once, which is a much wider field of view than humans and many other animals would have the capability to do. Let's take a look at our next specimen. So what we're going to do next is a dragonfly nymph. A nymph is a aquatic um, larval stage of an invertebrate. And this is the head of our dragonfly nymph. You can see the two large compound eyes on the left. You can tell the dragonfly is a predator because its eyes face forward. Predators have typically forward facing eyes because they need to zero in on one point and to focus in on their prey. Many different species that are prey animals will typically have side facing eyes so they can plan a strategy of escaping of a predator because they need to be able to look both ways to tell which route would be the safest to go. Now, let's see if we can show you the jaws of the dragonfly. The dragonfly is quite a powerful predator, as we'll be see in a second. Those are the mandibles. They can actually are attached to a part of the body that can actually jettison outward and grab passing prey. Dragonflies typically eat things like small fish, other invertebrates, tadpoles, all kinds of aquatic species that would be swimming by in their natural habitat. And you can see that the dragonfly uh, has interesting legs. Let's see if we can get through there. A dragonfly is a type of arthropod, which is an armored creature. Arthropods have a jointed skeleton as well as an exoskeleton, and these joints are unique because they're all movable, but yet they're on the outside of the body. Insects do not have an internal skeleton. That's why they're invertebrates. And because of this, a lot of species of invertebrates have developed unique ability to fit into small spaces. Some common noticeable creatures that can do this are the cephalopods, which are the squids, octopi, cuttlefish. There's also nautiloids, which are cephalopods, but they have developed a hard shell, which does not allow them to actually do this. We'll take a look at some cephalopod specimens a little later in the video. And let's see. We'll go back to the back of the dragonfly. See if I can show you. This dragonfly was actually preserved in a stage where its wings are just starting to develop under the exoskeleton. Each time a dragonfly molts or sheds its shell, it will grow larger. The aquatic stage does not actually need wings, so it will actually wait till later stages to start developing those. And on its final molt, those wings will actually be freed. And when the dragonfly crawls out of the water, it'll give itself time for those wings to actually harden enough to be allowed for flight. And one more thing about dragonflies. This one is actually a male. You can see the two ends of the last segment there. If the middle part was out further, that would indicate a female. Females have ovipositors, which are used to lay eggs on the water. So that is how you tell a male and female dragonfly nymph, and occasionally dragonflies as well. Now, moving on to our next specimen. Here we have a invertebrate that is in the arthropod family and lives on land, but is not technically an insect. This is a myropod, is the term for this group of insects. What we have here is a diplota, which is a millipede. Let's see if we can get to the head. There we go. It's a little hard to see, but this is the head end. The millipede has two jointed antennae, which it uses to pick up chemical messengers and sense its environment. The millipede here is a diplota, as I mentioned. This is the giant millipedes. I believe this is an American millipede, Narcissus americanus, which is one of the common species in North America. You also get species that are much smaller, like the greenhouse millipede and almond-scented millipede. The almond-scented millipede is a species of flatback millipede that is yellow and black, and they call it that because it secretes hydrogen cyanide in larger amounts than other millipedes, which can create the almond scent. The almond-scented millipede uses this as a defense mechanism. Some species of Madagascar lemurs have actually found that the almond-scented millipede's defense mechanism works well as a natural bug repellent and actually seek out the millipedes and rub them on their fur. This actually prevents biting flies and mosquitoes and other parasites from biting onto them, which can be quite annoying. Now, let's take a look at the legs of the millipede. While the millipede may be named a millipede, which means thousands of legs. Millipedes don't typically have that many legs. There's some species that do reach close to that number, but usually it's around hundreds or thousands. And the millipede, as you can see, also has jointed legs like other species of arthropods. The way you tell millipedes from centipedes, one of the main ways, is that the millipede typically has a more rounded body, but that is not always the case. We have species like flatback millipedes. But the way that's most reliable is to look at the number of legs per segment. Millipedes will have two pairs of legs for segments, that's four legs on each segment, while centipedes will only have one pair, so that would be two legs per segment. Now, the millipede is typically a slower moving species than their cousins, the centipedes. This is because they have typically more legs, and that actually requires more coordination with a higher amount of nervous system. Now you can see the millipede is protected by a hard shell. One thing that millipedes typically share in common with scorpions is that their shell actually contains enough calcium to be reflective in UV light. That means if you have a black light or a UV light, you can actually detect millipedes easily because they will emit a faint bluish glow. Some millipede species, like some in California, are actually bioluminescent, so they will actually glow without any source of UV light or any type of light, glow in the dark species. Now, let's take a look at our next specimen. For our next specimen, we're going back to an insect. This is a longhorn beetle. And here we can see a segment of the antenna. See if we can get to the top, and I'll show you just how long they are. And there is the first leg. Let's see if we can get the head in focus here. Here we go. I can kind of see the eyes there. The longhorn beetle has a large set of eyes. Now, the longhorn beetle is invasive in many parts of the United States. There are native species of longhorn beetles, like the pine sawyers, which are actually quite beneficial to trees. Research indicates that these native species of longhorn beetles will actually burrow into the tree but keep the tree alive as long as possible. That is because they make these burrows for their young and will lay their eggs inside these burrows while avoiding parts of the tree that carry nutrients to help keep the tree alive as long as possible so their young will have something to feed on once they emerge. The longhorn beetles that are invasive to the area don't just lay their eggs in trees, so they do not worry about this and will usually kill off trees. More recent research also suggests that the longhorn beetle's chewing action, the native species, which is why they're called sawyers because they make a sawing noise, may actually be beneficial to the trees as well, because this will allow the sawdust to settle and be reabsorbed into the soil, which can be a nutrient dense ingredient in the soil to recycle those nutrients. Let's see if we can flip this over. And I will show you the jaws of the longhorn beetle, which are quite impressive. This is because they need to use those jaws to bite into wood. Sure, there we go. Kind of see them. They're those sharp black pieces on the mandible. It's kind of hard to see on this specimen. It's an older specimen. The acrylic's a little worn. Show you the back of the longhorn beetle, if I can. There we go. You can see some texture. As you can see, the longhorn beetle actually has a hard outer wing casing, like most beetles in the Cleoptera family. That's the family of beetles. And inside, they have a softer set of wings that are used for flight. It's kind of hard to see, but they are in there. They resemble the shape of a dragonfly's wing and are actually very similar in structure and function. Our next species we are going to show is the giant centipede. The specific species we have here is Scolopendra subsupinus, which gets into focus here. You can see on the legs. The centipede actually has these claws on the legs. And one main difference between centipedes and millipedes is that centipedes are actually predatory. And if we go up to the head, you will see that they have a powerful set of fangs right underneath their antenna. These are actually venomous in most centipede species, and that is used to subdue prey. Centipedes are voracious predators, and most centipedes are actually territorial. One species of centipede, the Venezuelan giant centipede, which is Scolopendra gigantea, is actually the largest in the world, and they are actually territorial. So they will actually come and actively try to fight for their territory if they are threatened. Centipedes are actually surprisingly good parents. They will actually care for their young for quite a while. There is also another species of centipede that is known to eat bats. It lives inside caves and will hang the upper part of its body down and grab passing bats as they fly out of their caves in the morning and into them at night. Now, you can see centipedes have antennas similar to millipedes. One of the differences, as I mentioned, is they have one pair of legs per segment, and those are usually close to the sides of the body, while the millipedes are typically located more centrally. And you can see the body of a centipede, or at least this species, is much flatter. There is the species known as the house centipede, one of the only species with a rounder body. Those are typically have quite long legs compared to other centipedes. And as I said, a rounded body. They are typically identified by the three stripes that run down their back. Now, moving on to our next species. Now, we are going into some aquatic species. Actually, before we do that, we got a couple more land species. First, we have the trihorn spider. This is a species of mostly tropical spider. You do get some in areas in North America. You can see all these hairs on the top of their head. Spiders typically have hairs along their body that they use to detect movements in their webs. These actually alert them to any nearby prey that is tangled up so they can go out and bite it. Centipede venom is unique because it also liquefies the inside of the body, which allows the centipede to easily eat the meal through hollow mouth parts. Now let's take a look at the back. You can see those spines there. The trihorn centipede has a kind of triangular body shape. It doesn't actually have three spines. It has quite a few along its body, as you can see. And we'll flip it over and take a look at the head. And there we go. You can see the fangs. Spiders can be classified into two types of fangs, downward facing fangs, which are typically ground spiders, like the jumping spiders and the tarantulas. And then you have web dwelling spiders, which have fangs that curve toward the inward part of their mouth. Those are actually unique because the ground spiders typically don't spin much webs, so they need to have their fangs pointed out toward their prey at any moment. Spiders that have webs, they can afford to focus their fangs right where they need them, so they do not need them pointing out at any given time, so they can tuck them away, like such. And this species of spider, if you can see on the left of the mouth, there are two tiny leg like projections. Those are called pedipalps, and those are used as feelers and to guide things toward the mouth. One more thing about spiders is that they are arachnids. Arachnids have 8 legs and 8 eyes. They are classified kind of between myriapods, which include the centipede, millipede, and a species known as the velvet worm, and insects, which have 6 legs and are arthropods, so they have a jointed skeleton. There is also a species known as the horseshoe crab, which is technically considered a chalcarite, which is a unique species, which its closest relatives today are the spiders and scorpions, but they used to have a prehistoric cousin known as the sea scorpion. The sea scorpion was an aquatic invertebrate that lived hundreds of millions of years ago, and typically during the Silurian to around the Devonian period. That's when you developed the placoderms, which were the armored fish. These armored fish became enemies to many arthropods, including larger arthropods like sea scorpions, which eventually died out around this era. Moving on to our next species, we actually have a smaller longhorn beetle. This is a go. I believe this is a small type of Sawyer beetle. I do not have my list in front of me on the exact species. This is, yeah, I believe this is a type of Sawyer beetle. I know it is not a northeastern Sawyer beetle or a whiteback Sawyer beetle. I do not recall the exact species at this time. Now moving into our aquatic invertebrates, we'll start with a simple creature, an echinoderm. Echinoderms are spiny-skinned animals. Sea stars are one of the most well-known examples. Here we have a sand-sifting sea star. This species has kind of a flatter body than most sea stars. The echinoderms have a hydrovascular system, which is controlled completely by water. And they pump water in through a spherical on top of their head, which powers all these little projections called tube feet. Those are those yellow dots you see there. Those would have been tube feet. Let's see if we can get to the central disk. Sea stars and their cousins, the brittle star, and many other echinoderms can all regenerate their whole body as long as they have part of this central disk. The central disk acts as the nerve center for echinoderms, and you can actually cut a sea star into 5 individual arms, and each one will actually regenerate as long as it contains a piece of the central disk. This was actually a problem in Australia near the Great Barrier Reef at one time because the crown of thorns sea star was destroying corals, and the local fishermen thought they could fix the problem by cutting up the sea stars and throwing them back. Well, did they know that this actually created more of these crown of thorns starfish and created a larger problem in some of the areas of the reef. This was eventually fixed through conservation efforts and captive selling and extermination of some of the species of crowns of thorns in the area. Sea stars are unique animals because they typically eat animals like clams, and to actually do this, they will actually use their arms to open up the clam slightly, and then they will extrude their stomach outside of their body to liquefy their food, and they will eat that liquid while their stomach is still outside of their body, and then bring it back in once they have finished. Sea stars are one of the few animals in the animal kingdom to eat with its stomach outside of its body. Next, we have another echinoderm. This is a sea cucumber, specifically a young Pacific giant red sea cucumber. Some people call these prickle fish because of their spiny-like body. This one is a young one. As I said, they're giant sea cucumbers. They grow to quite incredible sizes. They're typically red in color, but can also be this matte brownish color, as well as some other colors. The giant sea cucumber was actually reclassified into a different genus recently, which is an interesting fact about sea cucumbers. You cannot see it quite well in this specimen, but sea cucumbers' bodies have 5 radial lines that have their 2 feet, but they also have these oral arms which form a crown, and they actually use those when feeding to bring food to the mouth. Lots of species are actually filter feeders, and they will just bring food into their mouth and eat it right off the feet. Next, we will look at a crustacean. This is a species of a squat lobster. We living in Maine. We have the American lobster, Homarus americanus, which is typically what people think of when they think of lobsters, or the reef lobsters. This is a squat lobster, which is actually closely related to crabs. They have a smaller body than true lobsters, but they are still all classified as crustaceans. Crustaceans are an older group of arthropods. And the lobster has antennas that are very sensitive to the water column. Lobsters are typically scavengers, so are squat lobsters, and they will eat whatever they can find on the bottom. They will eat both plant and animal material, so they are considered omnivores as well. But their favorite is typically decomposing matter. You will see lots of squat lobsters on whale fall carcasses. That's dead whales that have sunk to the deepest parts of the ocean. And let's see if I can show you. This is the under part of a lobster. Here we go. These are known as swimmerets. Both lobsters, squat lobsters, and also crabs have swimmerets. Crabs typically keep them tucked up underneath their carapace. Lobsters just have them under their tail, as well as lots of species of squat lobsters. These swimmerets are used for storage of eggs. The main way to tell a male from a female lobster is the first pair of swimmerets. In males, these will be hardened inside of a calcium shell. So they will be hard, and the females will have their first swimmerets as a feathery type of swimmerette that is not as hard. These are the types of swimmerets that they store their eggs on. The lobster must constantly move the swimmerets to push water over the eggs. This actually oxygenates them and allows them to survive. Next up on our list is another crustacean. We have a box type of box crab. Here we have the eye. Crabs usually have eyes on stalks that helps them look around in all different directions. Crabs are scavengers, but they're also omnivores, so they'll eat not just dead material, but plants and animal matter as well. They are neither predator uh, completely nor prey completely. So they have kind of an in between on the eye set, which means they can look both forward and round. Lobsters and crabs and horseshoe crabs in the chalcopyrete family are some of the creatures that have the 360-degree vision because each individual lens on the compound eyes have their own individual optic nerve that allows each one to see individually and process individually in the brain, which gives them at all times a 360-degree view from each eye. Show you the claws. They don't come in very well in acrylic, but most species of crabs and lobsters have two different types of claw. One being the crusher claw, which is more broad, and then the other one being the scissor claw, which is used to tear pieces of meat off of carcasses and dead creatures and creatures they have caught. Now we're going to a even simpler creature. Our first cnidarian specimen. Cnidarians are my specialty. Here we go. Here we have a red anemone. Anemones are a species of cnidarian that stay in one place their whole life. They have a gelatinous type of body and contain tentacles with stinging nematocysts, which are stinging cells also found in jellyfish and some species of coral, most notably fire coral. These nematocysts, each one contains a tiny barb that, when activated, fires out of the cell and injects venom, and this will actually immobilize the prey, as it is typically a paralytic agent. Now, some anemones and jellyfish, and also the fire coral, can actually affect humans, some worse than others. Some species, like the moon jellyfish, don't affect humans because the barbs are too small to penetrate the skin, but some people susceptible to the venom can develop allergic reactions. This can result in some mild irritation. The worst a moon jelly sting will ever get is about the rate of a bee sting, though. And speaking of jellyfish, we actually have a preserved moon jelly specimen here with us today. Take a look at the tentacles here. Now, these are the oral arms of a moon jellyfish. They have tiny stinging cells. Most jellyfish do not contain their stinging cells on their oral arms, as those are used for feeding exclusively, except for the moon jelly, because they do not actually have a stinging array of tentacles, which are typically found around the outside of the bell. In the Maine and New England area, we have several species of jellyfish besides moon jellies. We have the Atlantic sea nettle which typically forms large blooms, which technically don't often come into shore, but occasionally you will get them. You have the ever common lion's mane jellyfish. Currently, there is a bloom moving up north and is currently located in New Hampshire, making its way towards Maine. It was in Massachusetts a little while ago. And you can see that the jellyfish has a translucent body. That's one of the keys of the moon jellyfish. They have four disc-like structures within their bell, where the oral arms attach to. That is one of the characteristics of moon jellyfish. And we don't have many other jellyfish species in the area. There are hydrozoan species, which are also a type of cnidarian. Um, Hydrozoan species include things like Portuguese man-o-war, by-the-wind sailors, also known as Velella velella. They are not typically found around the area. There has been an increase in blooms of Velella velella and also the Portuguese man-o-war in recent years, especially this year. We've had several blooms off the coast of California, several blooms in the Florida and Texas areas, and we have also had a large bloom in Okinawa, Japan of by-the-wind sailors as well. This is a phenomenon that is being studied. We've had several blooms this year, usually get 1 to 2. This year we've had at least 5 different blooms in some areas, which is an increasingly concerning trend, but is being studied why exactly this is happening. Jellyfish have also been moving further north than ever before, which is a problem because when jellyfish move north, their predators, which are typically things like sea turtles, can't actually survive in the areas jellyfish can. Jellyfish can survive slightly warmer water than a sea turtle. So when the jellyfish start moving north, they can move north to areas where there is no sea turtles, where the temperature is just wrong for the sea turtles, and that can cause their populations to explode, which is known as a bloom. When all kinds of jellyfish grow at once, and it's typically referred to when they're all in the same life stage. So if you have a young jellyfish and they're all young, that is technically considered a bloom. A group of jellyfish in different life stages is actually called a smack, which is a very interesting word for an animal group. Our next specimen is another crustacean. Here we have an Atlantic prawn. Prawn are a species of shrimp related to their microscopic cousins, krill, which is a major food source in marine environments. And you can see the compound eye. Prawns are carnivorous, but they eat very small animals, so they are technically more of a prey animal. They do have the side-facing eyes, but they are close to the front of the head, which is indicative of their predatory nature. You can see a lot of prawns that have spiky projections on their shell. This is as a defensive mechanism to protect them against predators. Some species of prawns have tiny claws, like this species. They are typically used for feeding and offer not very much defense for the species. Prawns and lobsters and other species of shrimp actually swim backwards. They do this not with their swimmerettes, but with a flick of the tail. Their jointed tail folds up in toward their body, and that actually pushes them backwards in a fast motion. Lobsters typically live near rocky outcrops and typically have a space of their own where if a predator comes, one flick of the tail and they're flung back into that little cave. We are moving on to some mollusks. Here we have a clam. Clams are a type of mollusk known as a bivalve. A bivalve is a two-shelled animal. You have creatures like oysters, also in this category. The prehistoric species of lamp shells are also considered bivalves. And then you have things like blue mussels and horse mussels, which are also technically considered bivalves. Mussels are a unique species because they produce a thread-like structure called abyssal threads, which they use to attach themselves to rocks and other things in their environment. Most species of bivalves will bury themselves in the sand. The blue mussel does not do that, and also the horse mussel doesn't do that either. They prefer to stay out and attach themselves to rocks. This allows more opportunities for filter feeding higher up in the water column than other species, so there's less competition for food. Next, we have a unique species, our first cephalopod of the night. We have here a cuttlefish. We'll show you a close up of the skin. The skin of a cuttlefish is covered in chromatophores, which are color changing cells. Octopi and squid have this as well. These chromatophores are used to change the color of pigment of the skin. Some have developed in such a way that they can also change the texture of their skin to become bumpy or smooth or mimic seaweed. Cuttlefish are one of these species. Now, cuttlefish, squid, and octopi are all highly intelligent. They have a large brain, and scientists have been able to show they're able to solve simple puzzles. Octopi, when kept in captivity, actually like to solve puzzles. It stimulates their brain and actually has been shown to increase their longevity. Most species of octopi, especially the smaller ones, only live a year. After octopi lay their eggs, they usually die. That's for the females. The males die right after mating. Some species of female octopi will guard their eggs until they hatch. They will actually starve themselves during this time and eventually die because of this. You can see a tentacle of our cuttlefish here covered in these tiny suckers. Suckers actually contain a taste bud like cell. So, octopi, squid, and cuttlefish all taste with their tentacles. Cuttlefish have 8 small tentacles and 2 longer feeding arms. This is a common trait they share with squid. Octopi just have the 8 arms, and nautiloids have different numbers of arms depending on age. Nautiloids are related to prehistoric ammonites and contain a shell, but they are not the only ones. Cuttlefish contain a cuttle bone, which is internal, and squids contain an organ called a pen, which is also internal. But there is one other species as well, argonauts, which are a species of pelagic octopi, which actually create a paper-like shell. Some people call them paper nautiloids, but they are not actually related to true nautiloids. They're actually a pelagic octopi. And speaking of octopi, we will be moving on to our next specimen, which is actually a common octopus, the Octopus vulgaris, as its scientific name is. Here you can see its suckers on its tentacles. Octopi, unlike cuttlefish, only have the 8 original arms. In males, the third tentacle is developed differently and longer than in females. This is used during copulation. And that is the mouth of an octopi. Inside of there is actually a organ called a beak. It's the only hard part of an octopi's body. And if an octopus can get its beak through an area, it can actually fit into that area. Since the beak is the only part of the body that is hardened, and octopi do not have bones, being invertebrates, so they can squeeze into any area their beak can fit. Octopi have been observed squeezing into bottles and other small man made objects. They have also been known to manipulate objects with their tentacles, which can be used to solve simple puzzles. Octopi can also change their color, like other cephalopods, due to chromatophores. Um, a lot of species cannot change their texture, but some can, like the giant Pacific octopi, which is one of the largest octopod species in the world. Here we are at the top. You can see some of those chromatophore cells. Let's see if we can find the eye for you. Octopi have very well developed eyes and especially shaped pupil, which is why in aquariums flash photography is not recommended because the octopi's eyes are extremely light sensitive. We have a couple more specimens to show you before the end of our stream. Next, we have one last crustacean, a pagurid, which is also known as the hermit crab. Hermit crabs spend part of their life in a shell. They actually do not produce the shell themselves. They take it from other organisms that have typically died or they have eaten. The unique thing about hermit crabs is their body is actually curled up tightly in that shell. They are actually more lobster-like than crab-like inside that shell. The inside of that shell, they also have gills. All species of crustaceans typically have gills and also a set of something else called book lungs. These book lungs, as long as they retain moisture, they can be used to breathe on land, which is why arthropods are some of the first creatures to move onto land. Creatures like sea scorpions, horseshoe crabs, and Brontoscorpio, which was a species of water dwelling scorpion, or some of these first creatures. You can see the antenna there covered with small hairs, which is sensitive to pheromones emitted by other crabs and other crustaceans. You can see the two eyes on the stalk. Now, the interesting thing about book gills is there is one species of crustacean that has managed to move up on land. These are the woodlouse, which is a species of isopod. Isopods are a invertebrate crustacean that can be found in all layers of the ocean. You have giant isopods in the deep, and you have smaller creatures like munid isopods, which are smaller isopods that can be found on the shore. Then you have creatures like amphipods, which are also known as scuds, and ostracods, which are a pelagic species of crustacean that has large eyes and a round body that lives in the water column. We have three more creatures to show you today. The next one is actually the last of our invertebrates. It is a mantis shrimp. Mantid shrimp are a very unique species of shrimp. They are typically larger than most species of crustaceans, and they have developed powerful claws. If I can get into view here, I'll show you the head. Okay. Microscope is not cooperating quite as I would like it to. There we go. There. The mantis shrimp has very unique eyes. They can actually see many more colors than a human eye can, and in different spectrums that are not available to be seen by humans. This is unique because there are colors that humans will never be able to detect, but mantis shrimp can see them. We have two more species to show you, but as I said, that's the last invertebrate. We have two species of fish that we have with us today. The first one is a familiar fish to most species, or to most people. This is our seahorse. The seahorse is a unique species of fish because, along with their cousins, the pipefish, the males actually give birth to the young. The female transfers the eggs to the male, who stores them in a brood pouch and fertilizes them. This is where the young remain till they are old enough to be released. And then, with powerful contractions, the male will release them into the water column. Seahorse babies are notoriously hard and do not typically survive in aquariums. They require very special care and very special food because they have incredibly small mouth parts. At this Ecoscience Center, where I have done a lot of work, we have actually raised a couple batches of baby seahorses. Most often, it was the lion seahorse, Hippocampus erectus. Hippocampus is actually Latin for horse of the sea, and the hippocamp was actually a mythological creature in some legends, such as that of ancient Ireland. It was technically a horse that lived in the sea, similar to creatures like the kelpie. And our last specimen today is from the Amazon jungle and the infamous Amazon River. We have a species called a sabre, which is the Venezuelan piranha. Here we have the eye. Piranhas have very actually well developed eyesight for being in such a murky environment. Most parts of the Amazon are very small visibility area, so a lot of creatures don't have very well developed eyesight. The piranha is one exception. They typically travel in groups and actually move in lots of areas in the Amazon. So some areas are clearer than others, which can be an advantage to them. They also have a well developed nose, so they can pick up scents in the water column, such as blood. And here we have the infamous razor sharp teeth of the piranha, which are used for tearing into flesh and tearing pieces off of the bone. Piranhas are usually portrayed as man eaters, but most species of piranha are actually herbivores and prefer to eat fruit and things that fall into the water. They also are related to their cousin, the pacu, which is also a fruit eating species exclusively. And there are some insectivorous piranhas as well, which will eat insects and smaller invertebrates that are in the water. We hope you had a good time today. I'll be ending the stream now. Hopefully, you enjoyed seeing some of these preserved invertebrates. If you'd like, and fish, if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, leave us a comment and we'll be sure to include those in future videos. Thank you.